Chapter 2 of Zhang Eiling's Young. In the morning, everyone in the village crowded in front of his house to see the bride. Jinhua dressed up and sat there, with a chosen Mrs. Quanfu combing her hair, applying powder and rouge. In fact, her hair is now cut short and she doesn't need to comb it at all. She has already applied rouge herself. This is just for good luck. She hopes that the bride will be as lucky as her in the future. And Tan was unqualified. Although she and her husband grew old together, they only had one son. The husband took her away and there has been no news for many years. When the time comes, the bride sets off and walks to Joukun, 10 miles away. A cousin walked up to her and played the gong. Jin Zhen, who was seeing off her bride, followed her with a jiao in his arms and a lantern because he would be back late at night today. He had both hands occupied, so the bride carried the bundle herself. She was wearing a thick new cotton robe, with a round body, and a big red silk flower on her chest, the same one worn by the labor heroes. The newly joined army also wore such a flower when they sat on the stage in the venue. The small procession passed through the village. The gong was beating loudly, and women and children everywhere screamed, "Look at the bride! Look at the bride!" A large group of people went straight to the entrance of the village. Aunt Tan stood at the front, chanting auspicious words loudly. She is going to go there soon too, to have a wedding banquet with her husband. Where's the old man? She turned back and looked around. Where did he go? He didn't catch up with the bride before she left. The old man was sitting on a small open pit on the side of the road. It was a stone well with two wooden boards on it. He sat on it to bask in the sun and smoke a dry pipe. The bride's procession passed in front of him, and he smiled and nodded to them. "Call, come here early, uncle," Jin Zhen shouted to him. "Hey, you can't miss it. Let's eat our girl's wedding wine," Mr. Tan shouted loudly to increase his lifespan. The old man has a smooth chin, and although his face is full of wrinkles, he still has a very delicate oval face, which simply looks a bit like a girl. She has a thin figure and a wrinkled blue cloth skirt tied on top of her cotton robe. There was something wrong with his eyes, which were white and watery, and he was already half blind. He had to tilt his head coquettishly and look from a certain angle to see clearly. When the sun was about to set, he and Aunt Tan took their grandchildren to Joukun, leaving their daughter-in-law at home to look after the house. The Zhou family has already sat down to have a wedding banquet. The bride and groom sat above the table in the middle, both wearing a big red flower on their chests. The setting sun shone into the dark room, creating a hazy light. The bride sits in the dusty sunshine like a red and white clay figurine. She looks unreal, yet strange and seems to last forever. Jin Zhen is the new bride, and he is also sitting at the top, at another table. Boss Tan and Aunt Tan were led to another table by the host. After some humility, they were forced to sit at the top. There were several young women walking around taking care of him. They were probably his wives. Mr. Tan held his rice bowl with his head down reservedly, pretending to eat, and occasionally picked up 2 grains of rice with chopsticks and put them into his mouth. Judging from the wedding banquet, today's food was very poor, not even a big meat dish. But the groom's mother was an attentive housewife, and she entertained her attentively from table to table. Although she is tall and has small feet, her movements are very neat. She noticed that Mr. Tan only ate white rice, and she quickly flew to his side like a big, black butterfly with a bit of a bat. "If there is nothing for you to eat, you must be full." Suddenly, she picked up the bowl of fried shredded pork with winter bamboo shoots in front of him and poured it into his bowl. Half of the bowl of fried shredded pork was poured into his rice bowl. He became anxious, stood up angrily, and asked everyone to comment, shouting, "How can I eat this? I can't even see the food. How can I eat?" But he finally calmed down, sat down and patiently dug out the rice buried into the fried pork shreds with his chopstick. Halfway through the wedding wine, the cadres from Joukun arrived. He was Comrade Fei, who was very young, with a round face, swollen ribs and cheeks, and a very serious expression. He imitated the style of veteran cadres, and like Comrade Wang in Jingin's village, he wore his cotton uniform very dirty. indicating that he was busy serving the people and had no time to take care of himself. A shiny piece of putty stretches downward from the collar, forming a V shape. He also imitated the mass workers among the old party members, tucking a towel behind his belt instead of a handkerchief. This was a custom passed down from the Japanese soldiers during the war. Jin Zhen also followed this method and tucked a towel behind his belt. Covered by a cotton-padded jacket, only a little of the lower end of the towel was exposed. But this already made him a little shy, as if he was imitating fashion. The towel was brought by his wife from Shanghai. It was brand new because it was never used for any other purpose. There are 4 red words below. Good morning. Everyone stood up and asked Comrade Fei to sit down. After repeated humility, the old woman moved aside and let him and her husband sit at the table side by side. There was no wine at today's wedding banquet, but on such a cold day, the room was warm and crowded with people. Plus, with empty stomachs, we had 2 bowls of full rice. Even without wine, we felt drunk, so everyone enjoyed it. His face was red and he looked like he was drunk. Comrade Fei was very kind and in a good mood. He asked the guests one by one how the harvest was this year, how many tons of rice and pounds of hemp they had harvested. Jin Zhen worked hard during the autumn harvest and was selected as a model worker, and Tan really preached for him. She is eloquent, talks and laughs, and is very perfunctory. She said a lot of things to Comrade Fei. Sometimes her words are not directly related to the topic at that time, but they're always in a precise rhythm, with a clear and precise tone. It's good now, the poor have turned around. Now we are the same as before. If it weren't for Chairman Mao, where would we be today? If it weren't for the Revolutionary Party, we poor people would have suffered for who knows how long. And Tan said the Communist Party. There was some confusion about the Revolutionary Party. She always called the Communist Party the Revolutionary Party, and sometimes even called it the Kuomintang. But at her age, the mistake seemed excusable. Overall, she made a very good impression on Comrade Fei. It is rare to see an old woman who is as progressive as she is. She forced the groom's mother to eat more and said, "You are only busy with other people. You are hungry." The hostess served a Zhao with food, and Aunt Tan said to a Zhao again, Your aunt, are not going back today. If you are willing to stay with your aunt, you can also live here. Aren't you reluctant to leave her? Didn't you cry yesterday?" The little girl continued to eat her meal quietly. Her dark eyes were dark, and she didn't look excited at all. Aunt Tan threatened her again. "We're leaving without you. Your father won't take you back today. Do you think it's so easy? Eat a full stomach. Wipe the oil on your mouth. Stand up and leave. I'll sell you to someone else." Everyone laughed. The hostess said, "Hey, you'll be living here from today onwards and won't go back." The child said nothing. Maybe she was surrounded by a layer of doubt and fear. Maybe not. It was completely invisible. But as soon as she finished eating, she ran to Jin Zhen, held his hand, and never let go. She followed him wherever he went. After the wedding banquet, we made room as usual. But today everyone seems to be a little apprehensive because there are cadres present. But Comrade Fei obviously wanted to have fun with the people and took the lead in making noises, so everyone gradually became lively. Someone shouted, "I want the bride and groom to hold hands." Aunt Tan acted as the bride's spokesperson, making excuses for her and bargaining for her. After arguing for a long time, Aunt Tan gave in and held the hands of the bride and groom together for a shake. Then, someone asked the bride to sit on the groom's knees and call her brother. As soon as this request was made, everyone laughed. The groom was anxious and wanted to escape, but he was pulled back and sat down on the edge of the bed. This time the negotiations took more time. Okay, the person who made the most fuss finally said angrily, "The bride doesn't give me face." "Uncle, don't be angry." Aunt Tan apologized to him as the bride called him. "Hey, ask the bride to pour you a bowl of tea." "Who wants what tea?" The bride sat with her head lowered, motionless, and without a smile. It became a stalemate, and finally Comrade Fei suggested asking the bride to sing as a way of scooping up the bride. Tan negotiated the price again and agreed that it would only be one song. Jinhua finally stood up, leaned on the corner of the table, turned her back, faced the wall, and sang the 8th Route Army March. One more, Comrade Faye shouted, clapping his hands, and everyone responded. Okay, one more, and Tan said, after singing this song, we have to let the bride take a rest. It's getting late. We have to go back and it's time to leave. The guest still refused to let go and did not agree to leave after hearing this. After grinding for a long time, the bride finally gave in. This time she sang Hi La La softly. It was also a new song she learned in the winter school class. Hi La La La, Hi La La La. There are red clouds rising in the sky, and red flowers are blooming on the ground. Comrade Faye came up and pulled her arm. Hey, turn round. Don't turn your back to anyone. She freed her arm, and he pulled her back, and suddenly laughed. The laughter was loud and crisp, and the sound seemed to have a hint of surprise. In that brief struggle, she pushed him so hard that he hit the table and a tea bowl fell to the ground and shattered. Peace every year, Tan said immediately, almost mechanically. What an attitude, over there. Mrs. Tan didn't wait for him to get angry, but she had already shouted, Hey! Why is your bride so angry? This is all just a joke on you. Didn't you hear that? It's getting more and more noisy? If Comrade Faye has a childlike temper like you, is this okay? If he becomes serious, it would be strange if he doesn't get angry. She turned away and apologized to the bride's mother-in-law. Don't be angry, sister. Our girl suffers because her parents died early. She has no one to discipline her since she was a child, and she doesn't understand any rules. From now on, this will be your business. Sister, it's all up to you to teach her a lesson. This time, just for my sake, don't worry about her. Look how magnanimous Comrade Faye is and not angry at all. Comrade Chang Fei was overwhelmed by her few words, and he was embarrassed. So he could only smile faintly, raised his hand, and straightened his hat. This bride has a really bad temper. The groom must be careful, otherwise he will be afraid of his wife. He laughed twice. The matter is over, but my mother-in-law's face is still very ugly in front of these guests. The family lost face. On the surface, it seems that the bride cannot be blamed, but of course she brought it on herself. Moreover, they are also afraid that the Kadris will hold grudges from now on. And as time goes by, they will inevitably cause trouble with their families. But today is the bride's first day, and of course it's hard for her mother-in-law to say anything. However, the air was still very stiff and everyone dispersed soon after. Jin Jun hugged a Zhao, and Boss Ten and Nantan led several grandchildren back all the way. There was a moon, so I didn't light a lantern. After walking a long way, far away from Zhou Kun, walking through the silent fields in the moonlight, Jin Jun finally spoke to the old man and said, Comrade Faye is not a good man. The old man smiled slightly and sighed when talking to Jin Jun. He is always very attentive. Oh, there are good things and bad things too, he said. The old woman took over and said generously, these Kadris are pitiful. They are not allowed to go home for a whole year. They are also so deserted. Jin Jun remained silent. Jinhua's mother-in-law seems to be a powerful person, the old woman said. There is a bride who shows off her face on the first day she walks through the door. How amazing, she said with a little gloating. I'm not afraid now. There is a women's association. Hey, that's true. There is a women's association now. They also said that they would hold a daughter-in-law meeting to fight against mothers-in-law. It's not easy to be a mother-in-law at this time, Aunt Tan said with a bitter smile. She is also a mother-in-law herself. Jin Jun was silent for a while, but then said, but it's not impossible. It all depends on the Kadris in this village. The old couple has no interface. They all remembered the woman from Toxie who went to the village office to accuse her mother-in-law of abuse and asked for a divorce. The Kadris tied her to a tree, beat her and sent her back to her husband's house. Many conservative people in the village heard it and agreed. But everyone felt that her husband's family had gone too far. After she came back, they hung her up, and her father-in-law, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and husband took turns beating her, breaking 3 big sticks. It seems that breaking one is enough. While walking on the track and field, one of Mr. Tan's grandsons slipped and fell. The old couple stopped to rub his legs. Jin Zhen walked in front alone, holding Ah Zhao, who had already fallen asleep. The moon is high overhead. The oblong moon is natural and cold, like a newly peeled lotus seed. The dark sky had no color and no clouds. It was hollow, and it was extremely desolate. As we walked forward, a winding, pale path appeared in front of us in the darkness. Sometimes there are huts with coffins on the roadside, crouching low in the fields. The family had no money for burial, so they built this simple hut and parked it temporarily. The house is not much bigger than a person's body, but it is the same as their house at home, with white walls and black tiles. I don't know why, but it doesn't look like a toy. Rather, it is like a dog house, where the deceased can guard his beloved fields like a loyal dog. Before Jin Zhen walked halfway, he had already digested the dinner he had eaten and became hungry again. At this stage, it is not an unpleasant feeling. The person seems to be empty and clean inside, and the whole person is light and airy, as if he can turn upside down, walk in the sky, run and jump around the moon. He himself felt a little strange. This stomach was simply a bottomless pit. After a year of hard work, he could never fill it up. Zhao suddenly started talking. "You're not home yet. Dad? Don't open your mouth. The wind is strong. Keep your mouth shut." Walking towards home, that dark and lonely home, he couldn't help but miss his wife even more. When there was a quarrel in the Zhou family just now, he remembered the quarrel on his own wedding day. The congratulators made countless requests, which seemed to be more noisy than ever before. Perhaps it was because the bride was so pretty. Even when the guests finally dispersed, a few hid under the windows to eavesdrop and set off a string of firecrackers to scare them. Everyone said that his wife was the prettiest. Maybe people are thinking about how such a Tanliang wife can rest assured that she has been alone in the city all these years. When a woman goes to the city to work as a domestic servant or in a factory, she often changes her mind and spends a sum of money to divorce her husband. Somehow, he never thinks that she will be like this. Every time before he could think of this, his thoughts would automatically stop. He didn't know whether it was because he had great confidence in her, or because he subconsciously had great fear about this matter, or there were other reasons. Maybe he was really very unsettled and didn't know it. Maybe he had doubted her for too long, so even when she said she was coming back, he wasn't quite reassured. Ever since she left, he has been feeling ashamed that he separated the couple for such a small amount of money, when he couldn't sleep because of his thoughts about her at night. He thought that she must also despise him in her heart, and they would never be the same again. Thinking of her, it's like there is a small fluttering flame in my heart, as if my hands are guarding a small flame in the strong wind, fearing that it will be blown out, but the fire tongues are running round, but it burns the palms of my hands. It hurts. He didn't want to think back to the last time he saw her. It was that year that the countryside was not peaceful, and there were ravers everywhere. Many young people were afraid of ravers and ran to the city. So he also went to Shanghai to find a job, and also went to see his wife Yuxiang. He has never been to the city. In the big city, the houses are as high as mountains, and countless vehicles on the road flow like a big river. Everyone looked up to him everywhere, either shouting loudly or laughing. He had never felt inferior to others in his life. This was the first time that he felt stupid. He shaved his head and wore unfitting and tight underwear. He has a cousin who is a patrolman in the alley. He lives with his cousin and visits Yuxiang's house every day. Whenever she was free, she would come downstairs and sit with him in the kitchen. There was a greasy square table against the wall, and the two of them occupied one side of it. She asked about everyone in the village and all her relatives in the nearby towns. He answered them all with a hint of a smile. He always sat with his face outward, his eyes not directed toward her, his body leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees, and his fingers intertwined. Their conversation was intermittent, but they couldn't let it stop completely, because there were many people coming in and out, and it would definitely feel strange to be seen if the two of them sat together and didn't talk. Jin Jun had never spoken much. He felt that he had never said so many words in his life. His cement-floored kitchen leads to the alley. It always rained, so he brought an umbrella. Yuxiang always opened the dripping umbrella to dry it and inserted the handle of the umbrella into the low railing on the half door. The small door was painted a dirty dark red. In the dark kitchen, the orange-yellow oil paper umbrella hung high, big and round, like a sunset. People kept coming in, and Yuxiang would often stop mid-sentence and smile at them, as if a little apologetically. Sometimes she would jump up, take down the oil paper umbrella perched high on it, and let people out. It seems like every house here has a back door and the front door is always locked. The hostess wore jewelry to the banquet and wore sparkling satin clothes. She still walked through the dark kitchen filled with soot, her golden high-heeled shoes clicking. The nurse held the child in her arms and walked in and out of the kitchen. Jin Jen often eats there. Sometimes she would go late and miss lunch, so she would cook some cold rice for him to eat. And with an air of challenge, she would pick up the oil bottle and pour some oil into the pot. She didn't tell him that now the wife at home came down every day to check their rice and briquettes, making a fuss about how they could be used so quickly, implying that there were new loopholes. The boss is always unhappy when a maid has family members visiting her. If it is the husband, their unhappiness goes to a higher level, bordering on hatred. Yuxiang still remembers that once, a maid and her man stayed in a small hotel for a night. Afterwards, everyone talked about it and it became a joke. The hostess mentioned it behind her back, laughing and scolding. She never said these words to Jin Chen, but he also felt that he would only inconvenience her and make her feel aggrieved. So after half a month, he still couldn't find a job, so he said he was going back. He used the money she gave him to buy a bus ticket. This trip was completely in vain, and it was a waste of her hard-earned money. With the money left over from the ticket, he bought himself a pack of cigarettes. I don't think it should be done, but the more depressed I am, the more I do such unreasonable things. Before boarding the train, he visited her for the last time. There are guests here for dinner today. And there is duckpo soup. Yuxiang is in the kitchen, using an old toothbrush to scrub the grumpy orange-yellow duck webs. He sat down, lit a cigarette, and placed his bundle on the other side of the board. They had exhausted all conversation material in the past month and a half and now had absolutely nothing to say. In the silence, he heard something rustling in the trash can. "What is that?" he asked, a little surprised. "It's a chicken waiting to be killed. Its feet tied together and temporarily perched in a trash can. The train doesn't leave for several hours. There was no other place to go, so she could only sit here and wait." Since she had nothing to say, Yuxiang told her what she should say over and over again, asking him to greet everyone on her behalf. She washed the duck webs and peeled the edamame again. She suddenly realized that she had thrown all the beans to the ground and kept the pods. She felt very embarrassed and hurriedly bent down to pick up the beans. Fortunately, no one was round, and Jin Jen didn't pay attention. After peeling the beans and picking the vegetables, she swept the ground and dumped them into the trash can. The chicken clucked in panic. When Jin Jen stood up to leave, she walked to the door, wiping her hands on her apron with a blank smile on her face. He opened his umbrella and walked to the alley. It was raining outside, and there were wine dimples on the yellow-gray cement. His heart was a trampled thing, stuck to the soles of his shoes. Shouldn't have come to town.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.